Hey there, welcome to Embracing New Life. If you are new, welcome to our podcast. We hope you'll stick around and find the content informative and enjoyable. If you're a returning listener, welcome back. In today's bonus episode, you will find the full, unfiltered conversation between Dr. Dan Green and Ryan Worley, which the last two episodes were taken from. So, you know what time it is. Grab that beverage of choice, get comfortable, go for a walk, or just drive as we listen to Embracing New Life.
It's intriguing to me that before the age of sciences, the mental health issues were handled by the church, as the church was the primary social institution to respond to the needs of the people. Mm-hmm. And we can look back at some of our church fathers who had real clear delineation in their understanding between spiritual struggles and physical struggles, or struggles of the flesh that we might even consider mental health issues. As we have learned more about mental health and how the mind works, how the mind and the body, the soul all work together, we've had higher delineation specializations, but we're still dealing with people.
Yeah.
And so the church has ebbed and flowed in its understanding of how just living in a fallen world with bodies impacted by being in a fallen world, how our mental health challenges have multiple causes typically, multiple influences, but because we're created as one being, body, mind, soul, heart, the whole person is one, that we have multiple causes. So sometimes we see the church has been very accepting and supportive of many of the real breakthroughs in mental health treatment. For example, the Miniature clinics that have done tremendous work over the decades, founded by Christian psychiatrists seeking to bring healing in their Christian worldview to the people there in the Great Plains back in the 30s, 40s, 50s. The church, though, at times has gone to one extreme of everything spiritual, which at that point can venture even what they physical challenges are spiritual. And while I would say, yes, all the challenges we have, the fact that I need to wear eyeglasses, before the fall, I don't think people needed to wear eyeglasses.
Yeah.
But our bodies don't function the way they ought to since the fall. Nothing has been the same since the fall. So sometimes the church has gone to some real extremes of saying everything's spiritual, and then they'll go to the other extreme and just really deny much presence of God in our day-to-day living and life experiences. So where I see it now, there's more acceptance than there was maybe 40, 30 years ago of the reality of mental health and how multiple things influence us. Some go so far as they exchange the gospel for a therapy model. And there they've taken out the reality of the being of God and us knowing God for who God is and knowing ourselves in relationship to God. Others go to the other extreme where it's all spiritual. I think there's a growing balance in many places where there's the recognition of God's sovereignty, God being God, and we are His beloved creation. And that there are many things that influence us, and many ways that we can respond to the great challenges that we have.
Yeah.
All of it under the lordship of Christ.
And so, do you feel like over the last couple of decades, at least, then the gap between the role of mental health and especially mental health services within both the individuals who fill the pews in the churches, so the congregants and the pastoral staffs, the gap is closing as far as the need for that kind of...
Well, the church was part of the society we're in. Our whole society has become much more therapy-oriented, psychologically oriented.
Yeah.
Sometimes the church has been very threatened by that. Mm-hmm. The other extreme, sometimes they've over-embraced it. Mm. I'm encouraged to see many situations, many churches that are able to see the value of health care, including mental health care, as part of operating under the Lordship of Christ, kingdom building for our Lord. So we can see that historically in Western civilizations, hospitals came out of churches. Healthcare very often was in the context of churches and facilities provided by churches as part of the ministry to the community. I think we're seeing something similar in mental health in many places.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think a lot of probably Americans, often think that, especially post-pandemic, mental health is kind of just a catchy, trendy thing that has caught on in America. But I know you do a lot of stuff overseas in the Czech Republic with teaching at seminaries and stuff over there. What is the mental health landscape in, outside of the Western Hemisphere?
The needs are very, very great. The resources often are quite minimal. I've had a number of seminaries in Africa, Asia, Europe comment to me, we have a lot of resources for our theology, but we don't have many resources for pastoral care for mental health needs. Interestingly, in Czech Republic, we're seeing this in this very atheistic country, one of the most atheistic and agnostic countries in the world, according to the UN. We're seeing that people will come to the church for issues around relationships, issues around mental health concerns of anxieties or depressions, that they are seeing that the church has something to offer real life here and now experiences. When a culture gets several generations away from a theistic mindset, they tend to be more and more just in the immediacy. And how do I survive right now? As the church has something to say about how to live well now, this opens them enough safety to ask the deeper questions of who is God, who am I, in light of that.
So, the church is recognizing their need for greater training and resources based around mental health services and curriculum. Do you feel like societies, by and large, are recognizing the need of mental health just in culture in general?
Well, we're certainly seeing in the last 10 years significant increases in suicide thinking and actions, in fear, anxieties, in depression, in reported loneliness, so much so that the Center for Disease Control's, our government agency, has identified that loneliness is now at epidemic proportions and a chronic illness. How is it that we have so many people around us in social media and so many things that we can use that we are so lonely, so fearful? So that we see the culture on the one hand demonstrating tremendous need. Counselors often have waiting lists, and yet the problems continue to be very, very profound.
Yeah, and as you said in the beginning of the question of, stigma and of mental health in the church, like this is a time frame when the church can really bridge that gap, right? Because where the resources are not few and far between, but they're inundated with too many people seeking services. This is where the church can really come to the forefront and stand up and be a resource for those in need, and especially the loneliness part of it. The
need for community is so profound for human beings.
Yeah.
I kind of like to joke that evolutionary psychologists talk about us as herd animals. The Bible refers to us as sheep, which is kind of discouraging because that's, of all herd animals, that's one of the most boring. Can't even be an antelope. But that need to belong in our herd, to belong in a community, that need we have to be together, to know and be known by each other, is very central to what it means to be a person.
Yeah.
And the church is designed to be a body, to offer a community where we need one another, where we know one another. And that is healing, but it's also just, if you will, the basis of flourishing. That's how we live well.
Yeah.
Our individualistic culture offers us a false hope that if I have everything my way, doesn't work.
Yeah, so that self-seeking narrative that society or the culture by and large gives you, that's probably one of the things that leads to, an increase in loneliness. What do you think are the other things that, lead people to a sense of loneliness in a culture where we're more mobile now than any society ever in the history of the world? We're more, in a sense, connected because of the internet and social media platforms than any society ever in the history of the world. So, beyond the narrative of seek what you want first, what do you think else leads to, the loneliness that people experience?
I'll start by saying I love technology. I enjoy it. I use it a lot. But it gives us a false sense of meeting our needs. It gives us a stimulation, but it doesn't give us satisfaction.
Yeah.
So social media, and we'll have further discussions on this in the future, social media gives us the illusion that we're connecting, that we're being known, but we're not. It's I'm managing how much I share with you, and I receive what you're choosing to share with me. And I'm not able in social media really to have a dialogue to understand. I'm just exchanging words that I fill the gaps in with in my own imagination, my own perceptions. So we see with social media a great decrease in community, which we say, oh, I've got 1,200 friends. No, you've got digital contacts that you may exchange words, maybe even images. But that is not meeting that need to know and be known, that is to love and be loved, that is so central to being a person. I think another variable is we still struggle with basing our identity on what we achieve, what we produce, what we own. These variables, these factors of life that reflect something about us, but it doesn't reveal who we are.
Yeah.
And so we can be very consumed with achievement, goal attainment, those types of things that often are competitive. We're not opening, becoming vulnerable, knowing and being known. We're working to accomplish a goal that does not meet our deep needs.
Yeah, and what I hear you saying in there's a lack of true kind of vulnerability that exists within our culture. Probably handcrafted vulnerability, where people share the handcrafted pieces of vulnerability that they want other people to see, but not a true, authentic vulnerability that really does lead to that feeling of being known.
I'll often ask people, what's your first reaction when you hear the word vulnerable? And they'll say things like dangerous. Or I had one man recently tell me stupid. Vulnerability can be dangerous. They're accurate there. Yeah. And sometimes it is not wise to be vulnerable in some scenarios. But here's the dilemma that we're in. In order to meet that need to be known and know other, love, be loved, to connect with another, I must become vulnerable. And I must become vulnerable with someone that also is becoming vulnerable in a similar way at the same time. In order for two people to connect, we connect at shared places of vulnerability that always involves emotions.
Yeah.
And that's dangerous.
For sure.
So the safest place to be is isolated.
Mm.
But our needs are unmet. To meet our needs, I must take risk. And that creates quite a dilemma for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I often think of, when we talk about, vulnerability, I often think of C.S. Lewis's quote of love, which he says, to love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will be run and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. To love is to be vulnerable.
I really appreciate that observation. And the safest place, he described as a coffin.
Yeah.
Not very attractive.
Not at all.
No. So we had this huge dilemma between being vulnerable, meeting our needs, and being safe. And we see that things like living in truth, living inside the boundaries of commitments, those types of things offer us safety so that we can become vulnerable.
Yeah.
Doing it on my own is very dangerous.
Mm-hmm. It is, and I think that's where the example of Jesus Christ is so powerful because, yes, all truth resided with him, all justice resided within him, but also all grace, all compassion, all love, and it's really that willingness to meet people where they're at, and sit with them in that, but while also not judging them in that, is a pretty powerful thing because I think that's what we fear the most with vulnerability is to be seen and then judged and then rejected, but in Christ we find that acceptance, and love, and grace, even though the truth resides with him,
Yeah, I like to think of the safety that comes in our Christian gospel in Romans 8:1, we're told there's no condemnation for those in Christ Jesus. That's safe.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the chapter, same chapter, we're told nothing can separate us from the love of Jesus. That no condemnation, fully, continually loved. That's what we're designed for.
Yeah.
That is where we flourish.
Yeah. And it's in that place of deep vulnerability, really, that freedom is found, right? You have in Galatians 5:1, it was for freedom that Christ set you free. So don't be enslaved again to what you used to be enslaved to, he goes on to say, And so, it's amazing how it's a difficult task, most definitely, to be vulnerable, to be seen, to be heard, to be loved, and, to risk judgment and rejection. But it's in that place that you actually find freedom and the ability to live the way that God has designed you to live. It's a pretty incredible thing.
And that contrasts with a common assumption that freedom is, I can do anything I want to do.
Yeah, exactly.
And there are no restrictions on me. And what we find is when people pursue that sense of freedom, they get more and more alone, out of community, in more conflict. And more of the same only intensifies it.
Yeah.
The idea that I'm free when I'm living congruent with my design, how I'm designed to function, has been a real helpful concept for many of the people that I've worked with.
Yeah, and it's that idea, that a lot of writers will refer to nowadays as the upside down kingdom, where Christ said, I came not to be served, but to serve. It is really that idea that in the process of living the way God has designed us to live, it will lead us to a place of not only meeting our own needs and wants and desires at times, but also serving others, from a heart that's genuine and seeking their best as well, not just my own.
And that's a very profound principle in many mental health approaches. In the 12-step approaches, helping others facilitates healing of self.
Yeah.
Giving to others, serving others as a means of, at times, treating depression. It can be used to reduce anxieties. That the interpersonal element of this is very much a Christian value, but it's also a mental health value.
Yeah, most definitely. Most definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's amazing how integrated things are when you really start to look at them, right? It's not as black and white as we often like to make things seem. And yeah, there's an amazing amount of integration that goes on with all of things in life, for sure.
And in my career, I haven't found huge tensions between my psychological knowledge base and practice and my faith walk. Sure, there are theorists who have completely naturalistic, ungodly approaches, perspectives, and there certainly are those who may identify as Christian that have some very distorted views of what Christianity is as well. Mm-hmm. So discernment is always required, but when we test what's real, what meets the criterion of the study either of our theology or of our psychology, that I find that there's not great conflict.
Yeah.
We can find examples where some people create a conflict in their theorizing, but that's not universal or inherent in the study of either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think historically, there's been a lot of just fear that has been propagated of, that there is major differences and it is heretical or whatever you want to say it, whatever the term was that they would use between mental health and Christianity. For those that are, thinking about like the possibility, maybe they've never done counseling and are thinking about therapy, what are the things that they should consider? What does therapy actually look like? And anything else you want to answer in that vein of questioning?
Oh, that's a big question. A couple thoughts. One is therapy is a relationship. It's very different than, for example, if I go to the dentist, I don't really have much of a relationship with the dentist. In fact, I don't talk while I'm there, frankly. But in therapy, it's relating with very specific goals and purposes in ways with boundaries that allow it to be safe. Mm-hmm. So in therapy, we have one person receiving help in a process from the other. The purpose is for the good of the one receiving the therapy. The therapist, the counselor, clinician, psychologist, psychiatrist, whoever it might be, that person is in a serving role, and they are in a fiduciary role. They are doing good towards the one that they're serving. So the goals and the purpose and the direction that therapy takes really is determined in this relationship for the good of the counselee.
Yeah. Yep.
As such, this is different, say, than a discipleship or even a mentoring type relationship, where the disciple or the mentor is going to be far more directive. Typically in counseling or therapies, that there's skills and approaches brought to reach the goals of the client, the counselee, whereas, say, in a discipleship, it would be to move towards the goals of the one doing the discipling. Sure.
Yeah, so that it's a good distinction to have in place when you're thinking about therapy, because I think it can be kind of thought of in those latter terms of it's going to be directed by somebody else and not necessarily by what I want to see happen in therapy. But the reverse is true. It's where the client is actually determining the direction and the goals that they have for what they want to accomplish in therapy.
And in that therapeutic relationship, the mental health professional is offering tools, offering insights, but also is doing working to understand and to know the counselee. Being known in such a way is part of the healing. When I am sharing myself with you, you're learning about me, but I'm also learning about me in my sharing with you.
Sure.
And so a lot of the healing or growth occurs in this type of interaction that's very purposeful, but doesn't seem all that technically sophisticated. But it meets the human need, and that's the goal, so that we can flourish.
Yeah, we're back to that authentic vulnerability that we were talking about. And the research is pretty robust around this, if I'm not mistaken, that, of all the variables they've tried to measure and why therapy is effective, the thing that always rises to the top is the therapeutic relationship between the counselor and the counselee,
Yes. There are many, many different techniques. Some work better with some problems, some work better with some people and others. But the most profound variable is that relationship and the features, the qualities of that therapy relationship.
Yeah.
One factor about that is learning to do that in the therapy process facilitates that person taking that ability into other parts of life. And so, for example, we were talking earlier about the tremendous cost of the great loneliness. Learning how to be known and learning how to know another in one setting can then be brought into other settings to start to address meeting those needs in the natural world.
Do you think that do you think that any client could meet with any therapist and find a working relationship, or are there just some situations where people fit better together than others? Or, when people are thinking about the person sitting across from them, a client is thinking about the therapist that they're meeting with, is there anything that they should be on the lookout for, either positive or negative for that therapeutic relationship?
Again, that is a big question, but it's a very important one for just like every one of us is unique and different. We have different gifts, different skills, different talents, and we connect more readily with some people than with others. That's true. A gifted and skilled counselor or therapist is likely to be able to connect with a very wide range of people. Still, maybe not everybody, and nobody has expertise in all concerns that are presented.
For sure.
So that's also another limiting factor. The feature of safety is so critical to being able to be vulnerable that when you're looking at building a relationship with a counselor, do I feel safe? What helps me feel safe? How could I increase the sense of safety? So some of the things that we do to help with safety is confidentiality. There's very strict rules, laws, as well as ethical guidelines about how we manage confidentiality so that there's a safe environment to be open, vulnerable, to share deeply. Also, safety can be enhanced by things like eye contact and rate of speech, or am I interrupted, or is there a pause? Is there a environment where I feel like I can let down my guard and find that you can understand me?
Yeah.
That is so important to having a sense of safety in a counseling relationship. And if I'm in a counseling relationship and I don't feel that it's happening, I don't feel safe, I'm thinking that something's not as it ought to, bring it up to your counselor. The bringing it into your sharing, into your discussion, is part of the process that changes us. So I would really encourage you, if you don't have that sense of safety, or you think it needs to have something done, bring it to their attention. And many times that produces the growth, healing. Or sometimes we decide it would be best to work with someone else.
For those who maybe have never been in therapy before, they think of, typical healthcare, meeting their PCP, and, maybe it's a 15 to 20 minute at best time frame. What are people looking at when it comes to therapy and the length of time that they'll have with their therapist per session?
Yeah, very typically, and there's variances, but very typically we meet for somebody between maybe 45, 55 minutes. A little less than an hour. That seems, from the research, from our clinical experiences, to be enough time to establish safety in that moment and to deal with some things. But also, it's brief enough that we can contain and take from that moment and go apply, however it would be relevant. Much shorter, sometimes it's hard to get started. Much longer, for many people, it tends to either become unfocused or sometimes maybe even too intense for something that we need to kind of break into pieces instead of the intensity of a much longer duration.
Good. Yeah, I think most people are surprised more often than not, if they've never looked into therapy and how long it actually lasts per session. I think they're surprised with the length of time that they're actually able to sit and talk with somebody in a given session. So it's good to hear. Well, glad that you could join me, and I look forward to future opportunities to talk about a wide range of things in the area of mental health and Christianity and those who provide services on behalf of both.
As do I, Ryan. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Embracing New Life, the podcast. New episodes will be released weekly, so make sure you subscribe and set your notifications to on so you do not miss an episode. Embracing New Life is a production of New Life Resources, a Christian counseling clinic in southeast Wisconsin, whose aim and goal since 1976 has been to provide high-quality professional counseling, psychological, and consulting services from within a Christian framework.